come on, let's go rally. And the last fight, let us face. The International unites the whole darn human race.
I'm Eric Trommater, and this is UK Cinema History. Today, The Death of Stalin, directed by Armando Iannuci. Despite the Italian-sounding last name, he's actually quite Scottish. How's it pronounced, Matt?
I believe it's Iannuci. That sounds right to me. Yeah, I was surprised when you said he was Scottish. I had no idea.
Hello, Matt. Hello,
His
hi.
father. Hello.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Looks like Armando Iannuci was his father was from Naples, and his mother was born in Glasgow to an Italian family.
But if you look at his history, most of it was actually working for Channel 4, the BBC. He actually co-created the Alan Partridge character for Steve Coogan, who is one of the most famous of all of the kind of British sitcoms, and he did the British version of The Daily Show for years and years and years before doing Veep over in the United States. Plus, if you look at the list of actors, most all except really the main two roles are played by Brits. So this film is not just as British as beans on toast. This is as British as haggis and a glass of Johnny Walker Black Label. So no regrets on picking this one, Matt. And Matt, I'm going to start with you. You chose this film. Just start us with what attracted you to this film, and what made you choose it.
Yeah, it's a film I'd been meaning to see for a while, and I had first came to my radar. I saw some news site mentioned Michael Palin was in it from Monty Python fame, and he hadn't acted in a movie in a good while. And Armando Iannucci's work I'm not quite as familiar with. I've seen bits and pieces of Veep, but I think that's about it, other than this. And it really got my attention when in the news it came up that this film was banned in Russia. So, Death of Stalin, it barely got a theatrical release in the U.S. It came out. Matt Bradley-Tschirgi, I'm an author of books such as the video game or Star Trek video games, an unofficial guide to the Final Frontier, and have a book recently come out that I helped edit it called Uwe Boll Raw, a memoir by the German director Uwe Boll. So that's what I have that's out. But yeah, we're talking about Death of Stalin. I picked this film because the idea of like Russian politics and comedy and Stalin seemed so unusual, and it also had a lot of actors I like Michael Palin from Monty Python, Jason Isaacs from so many films. I think of him in like Event Horizon is the first one that comes to mind, but he's done in the Harry Potter films. He's in those. He's done so much work over the years. Steve Buscemi and so forth. And it's barely got a release in the States. It came out back in 2017, and this was, I think it currently was streaming on Hulu or something like that, maybe HBO, one of those. But it's pretty easy to find on the streaming service, and I'm glad it's available because it's a British farce, albeit about Russian politics, and it's based on a graphic novel that's French that's never been translated into English, called La Mort de Staline. Apologies on French pronunciation, by Fabian Nury and Thierry Robin. And to just see all of that is just what a bizarre combination in a film. I think that
Sorry to correct you, but just so that people can, if they decide they want to, there is an English translation available. It's just not an official English translation, and it is available on Internet Archives.
Cool.
It's worth it just for the illustrations, to see how close to the illustrations they really got with the casting and the set decorations on this. Sorry, I'll let you get back. Sorry about the interruption.
No, not at all. That's really cool. I didn't know that. I did see, samples of the original French graphic novel, and yeah, I mean, it's shot for shot quite similar, even down to the expressions on the actors' faces. I mean, from what I could tell of the excerpts, it almost looks as close as something like the movie Sin City, where it's going for super faithful in that way. And I think that one thing I really appreciate about the film is a lot of other people, especially given that it's a comedy, would have characters speak in like these fake, overdone Russian accents. Boris Badenov, yes, Natasha, we have moose and squirrel, right? That kind of a voice. But instead, everyone uses their real voice for their characters, with the exception of Jason Isaacs, who did some research on his character of Field Marshal Georgy Zhukov and decided he'd be a Yorkshireman. And so, but with the exception of him, everyone else is speaking pretty much in their normal voice. And I think that adds a bit to the absurdity. There's slapstick, there's verbal dialogue, there's moments of sudden violence. And I wonder, since this is banned in Russia, if this movie is like heavily pirated over there, or what kind of different generations of Russians might think of the film, if they think it's offensive, if they think it's not. Also, in researching this, I found a very bizarre. It was a made-for-TV miniseries on NBC called World War II: When Lions Roared, and to play Stalin, they have Michael Caine in a lot of prosthetics. And you have John Lithgow as FDR and Bob Hoskins as Winston Churchill. That is neither here nor there with this, with the exception of Stalin being there. And even though it's called The Death of Stalin, it takes some time for Stalin to die, but it's about the power struggle. And it's mostly a true story from what I've been able to gather. There's several books I'd like to check out that are nonfiction that cover this topic. And yeah, those are sort of my initial thoughts on the film. It's a shame this didn't get more of a release. I don't think it was even nominated for any big awards in the US. Yeah, it looks like no Oscar nominations. You think for script at least it would get something, or the costumes I think are really well done, like you were saying, Eric. It definitely has a good period feel, and it manages to be funny and at times also feeling dangerous. I think it's a really fine line to how they do this film.
Thanks, Matt. And we're going to move on to Hi Bender. And Hi, your history with this film. Had you seen it earlier, or back in 2017? And your opening thoughts on it.
Thank you. No, I wasn't familiar. I wasn't aware that it existed until Matt recommended it, which is so I'm grateful that Matt did, because it's a lovely film. It's both dark and funny, which I love. So I'm grateful to have been able to experience it. Just a few things regarding. A few things regarding the actors. Michael Palin, from John Cleese's comrade in Monty Python, was one of the Christian Orthodox clergymen at Stalin's wake. So that's fun. And when the replacement doctors are summoned, one of the young doctor is the son of the writer and director. His son's name is Emilio. So that's kind of fun. And also kind of interesting to me the only actor in the main cast who's from the Soviet Union is Olga Kurylenko, who was born in Ukraine. And the director decided to not have the characters speak with Russian accents because he thought it would take audiences out of the movie. And he also didn't want the actors to worry about accents when improvising, which indicates that there was a significant amount of improvising. So I thought that was interesting as well. Some historians have pointed out there are a number of little inaccuracies, but I think what's most interesting to me is that some of these were very deliberate because the director said he didn't feel he could put in the story the way it actually happened because it would be too unbelievable. In other words, the actual facts were, the exact words were, chose to tone down real life absurdity to make the work more credible. So that's fascinating. I think that's like the whole interesting vibe about this movie is that the events are so astounding. And he toned it down. So that's a very cool thing. For example, when Stalin collapses from a stroke, one guard hearing the collapse asks the other, should we go in and check him out? And the other guard says he should shut up before Stalin kills them both for entering without permission. That is based on reality. Stalin, by the way, all these things are from IMDb. I want to give credit. Stalin left standing orders not to disturb him while he was sleeping under any circumstances at pain of death. So that's why no one tried to investigate when he didn't get up at the time he usually did. Let's see what else. When Melenkov talks about the no comma problem, it's a nod to a famous Russian thing where there's a piece of paper that says, pardon, comma, impossible to be executed. But if you change where the comma is, it could also read, pardon, impossible, comma, to be executed. So with the movement of one comma, you have a difference between life and death. And that's, again, this kind of surreal environment where someone's life can hang on a comma. In the end credits, people are erased from photos. That's a nod to the Soviet government actually erasing some figures who they'd purged from history by altering their images or deleting them from photographs. Let's see. Oh, there's another alteration to make it more credible. Jason Isaacs wears fewer medals than the character who's playing Georgy Zhukov, because the director thought the real number of medals were just too unbelievable for the audience to swallow. So yeah, again, I just think it's fascinating that the reality is even weirder than the movie. When they talk about there are no good doctors left in Moscow, that's a reference to an actual thing, a campaign in 1952 and 1953 called the Doctor's Plot that accused doctors who were Jewish of conspiring to assassinate Soviet leaders. So those are just some initial things that I thought were really interesting and caught my eye. I think it's a wonderful movie that captures how bizarre life under a regime like Stalin. By the way, Stalin is estimated to have killed 40 million people. 40 million people. So, that stuff, if we're going out on lists every night to go and eradicate whoever was on the list that night. And it was just like, going to pick up lunch orders. All of that stuff is apparently real. It's just an astonishing period of history. And I think treating it as dark comedy was a really smart way to go. And I'm grateful to know more about the history, to know more about the dynamics of the power plays between the different factions. And I just thought it was fascinating. And again, I'm grateful to Matt for picking it. I'm grateful to Eric for saying yes to it, even though initially he didn't think it actually was a UK film. Didn't find out the director was Scottish until recently. Anyway, those are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Hi. And when we get to Pedant's Corner, I'll go through some of the historical facts. And even though this is a film that's not meant to be sold as history, it's always kind of fun to compare the real events to what's being portrayed on film. And as always with Pedant's Corner, never consider that my criticism of the film. It's just a fun little game that we play here. But before we get to that, we're going to talk to Mr. Sila Blume. Oh, Matt, I'm sorry, I saw you on mic. Before we get to Sila, go ahead. I know you got a short period of time
Just
here.
one quick quote. I found, I was reading reviews of this when this came out, and Hollywood Reporter has a good first sentence of the movie. One of the funniest and most distinctive political satirists of our time has finally returned to the big screen, with a lacerating look at the regime of an overweight bully who demands unthinking loyalty and expects reality to conform to his every dictum. We're speaking, of course, about Joseph Stalin.
Those wags over at the Hollywood Reporter, and they do pull off a funny one every once in a while. Mr. Sila Blume, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you. And your thoughts on Death of Stalin, and if you have any history with this film, or whether or not this was your first viewing.
Hello, everyone. I am quite taken by the film in terms of not understanding much except the connections to history, but as an art piece, I had some difficulties with it. So I hope you allow me to sit here and listen to all of you talk about this film. By the way, I loved the music.
Well, you cut us off at the pass because we were going to ask you about that, because the music is very important.
Oh yeah, that beginning and that end. Well, towards the beginning and towards the end, this respective attention to, even though they made it funny by repeating the concerto, but it was they gave space to the piece at the beginning and at the end, at least to an extent that I really enjoyed it, and the piece is wonderful. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sila. Yassi, are you still here? I know you can't stay long, so if not, I do have your notes, and I'll make sure I go over them. But Yassi, are you still here? Nope. Yeah, this is her busiest time of the year because school's getting back into session, and her real life job gets rather busy. So we appreciate it when we can have her. But she had a quote that we use a lot here that she was reminded of when watching this, which was Karl Marx when referring to the difference between Napoleon Bonaparte and Napoleon III, referring to Hegel's quote that history repeats itself. He said, Hegel is right, history repeats itself, but he forgot to mention it's first as tragedy and then as farce. And that was kind of I have sirens going off, so give me just a moment. Matt, I know you don't have much time before you have to go, so I'm going to let you talk for a little bit, and then we can move to my pedant's corner.
Sure. Yeah, Eric, I think the Stalin police are coming for you because we're talking about this movie. But yeah.
Again?
But I like what you said, Sila, about the score, and especially there's a good music cue when Jason Isaacs is introduced as Zukov, where he has all the medals, and it's this very militaristic cue before he proceeds to punch someone in the face in short order, and he proceeds to punch a lot of people in the face. And I wish he was in the movie more. And the movie does a good job of introducing a lot of characters, and yet never make it confusing as it could be. It helps that when characters are introduced, it does say their name and their rank or political position, and it doesn't have scenes with tons of characters in it. Typically, the scenes tend to be a bit more intimate, and I think that is a smart thing to do with the structure, because on paper, a movie about a bunch of politicians and in meetings and so forth, trying to take over for Stalin could sound a bit dull, but the movie has a lively pace to it throughout, and I think the directing is well done. I mean, nothing flashy, but it never needs to be. It doesn't draw attention to itself, and I wouldn't mind seeing stuff. It feels a bit timeless, I think, the way it's shot. It's not like a Michael Bay shaky cam film, but not really was I expecting that, but it was nice to see.
And the slapstick doesn't feel slapsticky either, I think. This kind of reminded me of like the old Marx Brothers type films, or in a way what Lubitsch used to do with comedy, which is, yes, you've got them slipping in Stalin's piss and all of that, but it's shot as if it were just a normal drama, which is great. So the humor is existing there, but you don't have the director saying, "This is a comic scene. This is where you laugh," which is absolutely wonderful. And it reminds me that that's kind of what I love most about the show Veep, that the director created, is that kind of sense of the camera as an ultimate fourth wall, not really judging the scenes. This is a comic scene. This is a dramatic scene, etc., and shooting everything at an even pace. But I do want to. Yazzie, is your microphone working yet? I do want to get the pedant's corner out of the way because I would be kind of thrown out of all of my historical podcast Facebook rooms if I was caught not. Even though, like I say, I don't think this is a film that was supposed to be historically true. The fact of the matter is, we mentioned Jason Isaac's wonderful performance as Zukov, but of course he did not take any part in that coup because he was not the field marshal at that time, because he had become so popular after World War II that Stalin had kind of grown jealous of him, saw him as a second power base, and sent him off to the boonies to kind of keep him out of the way. And he had actually been demoted to field marshal. Molotov had been fired in 1949 as foreign minister, and that's Michael Palin's character, and had not gotten his job back until the mid 1950s after Khrushchev had taken over. He also it was true, he was on that death list, and that Khrushchev during the Stalinization period had created. And it is true that his wife had been in prison, but what they don't point out is that his wife had been in prison during the same lockup that had arrested and killed all of the doctors. And it was because, number one, she was Jewish, which they don't point out in the film for obvious reasons, because they did not want to heighten that element of it. And number two, she had a lifelong friendship with Golda Meir, who had become the first prime minister of Israel. And part of the doctor's plot, in inverted commas, that Stalin had created out of whole cloth was the fact that most of the well-trained doctors in Moscow were Jewish, and Stalin was starting to see them as a third estate who had fallen during a tour by Golda Meir into the camp of being more loyal to Israel than to the Soviet Union. And she was actually caught up in that. That portion is incorrect, but what would seem like a part that they would make up for comedy, that Molotov had actually fully accepted both that he had done something wrong to put himself on the death list, and that his wife had done something wrong to be caught up in the doctor's plot simply because he wouldn't contravene the party, is absolutely true. And not only that, he put it in writing after the de-Stalinization, after Stalin was dead, during Khrushchev's reign. He and Khrushchev's biggest fight was over whether or not Stalin had been correct about imprisoning these people, because what this film doesn't show is that what happens when they free most of the political prisoners that Stalin had kept, the crime rates in most of the major cities in Russia and throughout the Soviet Union, but mostly in the Russian part of the Soviet Union, went through the roof. And the people were very upset about that and blamed that on the what was called the Great Thaw. And of course, the time element of how they try and execute Berra is condensed from 1 year into one night, because he wasn't tried till 6 months after Stalin's death, and he wasn't executed until 6 months after that. But one of the things that they used to get rid of Berra was, besides the fact that he was a serial rapist, to the point where Stalin wouldn't allow his daughter Svetlana to be in the same car with him, was that it was his idea to release all those political prisoners. And so one of Khrushchev's actual master strokes, even though it was, as the film points out, Khrushchev's original idea, was to, when it went south, blame it on Berra and actually use that as part of his excuse for overthrowing him. But it did not have anything to do with the trampling of those people who went to Stalin's funeral. That was an accident. There were no soldiers involved in that. That was simply too many people coming to see Stalin's funeral at the same time, and it was kind of like what happens sometimes in rock concerts here. I think of the one in Cincinnati for The Who here in the United States, where there were just too many people in the same room, and 117 people got trampled to death. But that was not blamed on Berra, because what had really torn it for Berra was an uprising in Eastern Germany that they were able to blame on him. So again, though, that would be a very hard thing to make a film about, especially since you're attempting to condense all of these events into 1 year. The other part that is, I'm going to say, iffy, is the opening part, which is hilarious, but it's an apocryphal story about the recording of the symphony, and it had actually been made into a play earlier, called A Sonata for Stalin, and but it's an apocryphal story. It probably never happened. If it did happen, though, every other version of the story says it happened in 1944 during the war, or as early as 1943. It obviously wasn't something that happened. And this is the only version of that where the note actually said, that she was anti-Stalinist. She also, her family had not been in prison and killed. She herself had been fired but it was actually for sending Stalin that note, and that's what had turned her into a dissident. So there are other things, other people whose titles weren't the actual titles they were in the film, but those are most of my little pedant things. The one thing I do take issue with this film is Stalin's daughter Svetlana and how she's portrayed. Because Svetlana was a woman who knew 7 languages, had scored the highest score in history, in the history of the Soviet testing system in mathematics, and had graduated from their equivalent of getting a master's degree by the time she was 14 years old. Very intelligent woman. She did not go to Vienna. She actually stayed in the Soviet Union, worked from the inside until 1967 as a dissident against first Khrushchev and then against the regimes that followed, and did not immigrate to the United States until 1967. And of course, she ended up dying in Wisconsin as an old person's home, but left behind a great series of writings. And if you ever pick up any of her books or her diaries, you'll just see what an incredibly intelligent woman she was. And I don't really think they got the sense of Svetlana's character. But the reason that sticks out to me is because of how well I think they did with the rest. Steve Buscemi just gets Khrushchev, that working class Ukrainian farmer humor. And of course, a lot of it has to do with the costuming, the bad fitting suits that Khrushchev always wore. But that rank sense of humor of his, all of that, and Buscemi just really, really nails that. And Michael Palin as Molotov, who, by the way, the Finnish loved him so much they named a cocktail after him, the Molotov cocktail. No, that was because they were fighting against him. I'm sorry, in the Finnish Russian war. No, they named an IUD after him because that was what they were using to bomb his troops. But no, he really got Molotov as not only as a character, not only that, he really rather physically resembled. They all look like skinnier versions of themselves, but that had more to do with you. Once you were part of that power structure, you just plumped up. Because you were, it was a very, very poor country, and suddenly you were a part of the government and eating the best food you had in your entire life. Now, I realize Matt's got to go soon, but I am going to go through the rest of the cast afterwards. But before I do, Matt, give me some of your final thoughts on this, because I know you've only got about 5 or 6 minutes before you've got a meeting.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I was really impressed with the movie. I think it's one that I want to watch it again soon. I think it probably benefits from multiple watchings. And I mean, not only is there so much dialogue in this movie, a lot of it is delivered like passive aggressively and kind of people whispering as they're talking. And so much so with the overlapping dialogue, it reminded me a little bit of Altman's movie MASH in some ways. I mean, it's different in a lot of ways, but I think just with the overlapping dialogue of the Robert Altman films, it's that was something that came to mind. And I love all the business with Jeffrey Tambor and his bad wigs. I think that's very that's quite funny. And Olga Kurylenko, who I mentioned, is very good in the movie as the pianist. She's perhaps best known for being the Bond girl in Quantum of Solace, the second Daniel Craig one, and also played kind of a similar part in Hitman, a movie based off a video game, 2007. So yeah, it was good to see her do some strong work
And
here.
French movie lovers, she was the vampire in Paris Je t'aime.
Oh,
So there, and you wouldn't recognize her between the two films. It's so weird.
wow, that's a deep cut. Yeah. I think what else comes to mind? I mean, yeah, the acting just across the board is really good, and I think it's just the kind of thing that would normally get a sequel, but I kind of would hope they did a part two or something just to see what happens next, because it's so much going on. And looking at Russian history, there's quite a high bit of turnover uh, for a bit there, to say the least, as far as who was on top. I'll end with an anecdote where um, my dad worked in Russia a little bit in his career, and he got to go one time when the public could see. There is God, I forget if it's Stalin or if it's
Now,
someone.
Lenin is the one who's still preserved. Stalin's,
Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
right.
They didn't preserve Stalin, but yeah, they preserved Lenin.
Apologize, but Lenin, but anyhow, my dad had to wait in line, and as part of it, random Russian guards would come and just throw people out of the line if you look suspicious. But my dad, with his big beard, and we do have some Russian ancestry, uh, was able to pass enough to get in, and he. So that's something I think of whenever I think of Russia, even though that's not Stalin, as you pointed out. But yeah, no, very good film, worth checking out. And if I was teaching a Russian history or a world history class, I might show this as a movie in class on a slow day, because I think it gets a lot of information across, even if it's not totally accurate. It does so in an entertaining fashion that would not put students to sleep.
And before when Patton's Corner is always just a bit of fun. It is amazing how much of history this film actually gets right. Especially now Khrushchev headed that meeting, not Malenkov, and there was never a thought of putting somebody as inept as Malenkov in charge of the Soviet Union. And of course, that coup took place 6 months later. But despite condensing it into a smaller amount of time, quite honestly, they get the facts pretty much right about how that coup went down. And also what the charges against Barrow were absolutely correct. And one of my favorite scenes is showing Bera actually participating in the torture, because he did that just because he was a sadist. And I have to give props, because those are always the hardest parts to play. But Simon Russell Beale as Bera, or Beria as they call him in this, just does an absolute great job of inhabiting a man who was probably one of the greatest bastards in history. And they get so much right about how the funeral procession went, and right down to that story about them trying to switch places while they're whispering back and forth and plotting, and each one of them trying to be the first one to get out of the parking lot after Stalin's death. All of that stuff is based on actual truth that came out in Khrushchev's diaries and then Khrushchev's autobiography. And really, they did get so much right that when I hear really detailed criticisms of this film and say, well, it's a bad film because, first of all, this isn't Braveheart. This isn't pretending, hey, this is what really happened. This is a comedy that's satiring that. And number one, and number two, when you compare this to most actual supposed historic films, like if you compare this to The Imitation Game, this film, would score a solid 90% on historical accuracy compared to films like that. So, Matt, I understand that you're going to have to go because you've got a meeting at 5:45. Thank you for choosing such a good film, and we hope to see you in future rooms here on UK Cinema History.
Absolutely. I look forward to listening to the episode when it comes out so I can hear more of everyone's thoughts. Thank you so much.
Great to see you, Matt.
Now, hi, you're a great lover of humor and of dark humor. And talk to me about something that Matt kind of touched on here, which is this bit of overlapping dialogue. He mentioned Robert Altman's MASH. I actually was thinking more like the Ben Hecht's screenplay for The Front Page and His Girl Friday, going back to those films of the 40s. And I had actually kind of thought that was a deliberate attempt to kind of bring the era about. And one of the sly satires was that they kind of, whatever accent they were using, kind of talked like old late 40s, early 50s movie stars, talking really fast like this. We got to do something about Stalin. Stalin's dead. I'm kneeling in his piss. And it really kind of reminded me of those kind of screwball comedies. But as a lover of comedy, how did the dialogue strike you? Did it feel natural, or did it feel like they were doing something more artificial?
I'm not looking for natural dialogue in a comedy. I think the overlapping dialogue indicated level of anxiety that people were revved up at a high level because they were living at a time where people were dying right and left. And at the same time, things were moving very quickly. And you also didn't know what might happen from, one day to the next, even sometimes 1 hour to the next. You had to be really quick on your feet to stay alive. And so under those circumstances, you want to indicate that level of always being alert and always being on some level anxious as a survival mechanism. We talked about this on my movie and TV deep dive podcast when we were covering The Bear. The Bear is notable for its overlapping dialogue, and it's it's a similar idea. They're under very how do I put it? Very time sensitive conditions, because when you're in a kitchen, you've got people coming in, you've got orders coming in, and you have to be able to respond really quickly to whatever comes your way, because you don't know what people are going to order, and you don't know what you have to basically improvise on the spot and pivot very quickly. And in a way, that kitchen situation corresponds to the real life situation of these people at that time. The director, you mentioned earlier, the director was saying, hey, it's not supposed to be 100% accurate. I actually have a quote from him. We're responding to academics who were saying, it should have been more accurate. And he said, I'm not saying it's a documentary. It is a fiction, but it's a fiction inspired by the truth of what it must have felt like at that time. My aim is not for the audience to feel, I'm sorry, my aim is for the audience to feel the sort of low-level anxiety that people must have experienced when they just went about their daily lives at the time. And I think he does that really successfully. And the overlapping dialogue is just one example of how he goes about doing it, but it's a good one. I also wonder which parts were scripted and which parts were improvised. It's impossible to know. But
I happen to have the script versus the cutting room continuity in front of me. A couple
Eric,
important scenes are there.
You are
so
a marvel. God bless you. You're just pulling one miracle after another. I'll shut up and listen to you. That's amazing that you have that.
So one of the best scenes is improvised, which is when Khrushchev is attempting to get Jason Isaacs as Zhukov in on the plot, and Zhukov says something to the effect of, "I'm going to have to report you to the committee for treason." And then he's, "Oh, that look on your face!" Not only was that improvised, but apparently it was improvised by Buscemi originally. Who thought it'd be funny, and it was a routine that they actually just worked up on camera. There's kind of like a little sub note there on the cutting room continuity in the script. Literally, Zhukov goes to Buscemi and says, "Okay, when's the coup start?" Which is far less funny. Although, I mean, it could, but they came up with that one on the spot. Most of the stuff, the dialogue that takes place in Stalin's bedchamber, and all of the dialogue when they're carrying Stalin, and the bit about the head and all of that is improvised. None of that was in the original script. The speeches that they give, those at Stalin's funeral, where they show each one of them and they all just one sounds more inept than the other, all of that was improvised, and it was written, actors improvise speeches in the original script. And really surprisingly for me, because it's such a masterfully done scene, all of the dialogue in the scene where they're gathering the Russian peasants together to fill the seats, all of that is completely improvised. It was just described in visual terms in the original script. Every line of dialogue, all about the line about how, if you get fatter peasants, you only have to gather half as many. The bit about I bet none of these people have heard of Mozart. The guy who yells out, "Hey, we should get my wife. She's 3 times the size of a peasant." All of that was improvised, which is weird to me, because that is, you talk about the greatness of overlapping dialogue, one of the most masterful scenes in terms of both directing and, if it had been writing in this whole entire film. But those are some examples. There are some others. The stuff between Khrushchev and his wife in the diaries, that was improvised. And that entire scene with Michael Palin meeting them in the car and talking to the dog, those were entirely improvised. But I'd have to go back and reread the script to find more, but there was quite a lot.
Again, that's super amazing that you have that information available to you.
Internet Archive, it's free for everyone. Just saying. All you need is a library card, and you can have any PDF there you want.
Thank you for doing that research. And thank you for sharing with us. It's very much appreciated. The deep research you do consistently is really a wonder. So bless you for it.
Now, Sila, I did have a question about the opening scene. What music is that? Because I couldn't get that from the credits, and I can't find it online. Did you recognize it?
I believe that is the 23rd piano concerto by Mozart.
Now, see, that's impressive.
Well, I refuse to take credit for that because I looked it up. I wanted to know what that was because it's not that I was shocked that that was Mozart because it kind of matches Mozart, but I'm not familiar, I don't care for Mozart, so I'm not really that familiar with his music. I don't listen to it as often, but I was quite impressed with the piece, and I was just curious, so I looked it up, and that's why I know.
Still impressive.
And I wanted to also make a comment about, in part, what both of you were saying just minutes ago. So that the director, with that statement, this is I don't want to make a documentary, and also the point of only about 90%, not only but 90% is related to facts, true to historical facts. And for a person like me who really knows, I would say, nothing about Russian historical politics, the knowledge of at least some historical information would allow one to perceive the film differently, because then one understands at which second or which moment are they doing something that, if you know what really happened, you can either laugh more or cry more. But I really enjoy that idea, which is not my situation for personal reasons. But I like the idea of being able to play with these facts in such a way, which I know quite well from German satire, where you are making fun directly of things that we know that happened. And as a result, they become much sharper in their comedy, in their genius in coming up with that idea of twisting it in such a way that you see clearly the historical aspect, and for that reason you laugh even more. So I really enjoyed that part. Of course, since I don't know that much, I'm missing a lot, but I just wanted to add that is a very, I find that to be a very good aspect of a film, even though I might be missing something because of not knowing. I found many things funny, but if I would have known the historical connection, then it's a different thing.
Well, and to the fact base, to the quote, that is what he gets across to me. That is that sense of paranoia. You really get that, and the fact that he's poking fun at it by and one of the things that he had to do to give us that sense of paranoia is what the historians are complaining about, which is to condense a year into 2 days, because that's how you get that feeling of of this hurried, paranoid world. Everything's gone to hell, and the sense of it. And so, while that's not historically accurate, it gives a much better sense of what the actual feelings were on the ground than would be a version that stretched it out over a year, I think.
Well, it is neither a documentary nor is it a historical film. So I guess it is up to the genius in a director or a screenwriter to be able to match the comedic aspects with reality, with facts, in such a way that the facts are not commanding the whole thing, but are clearly to be found.
Well, and another good point is that this ensemble cast that they put together really makes this work a lot better than something like The Imitation Game, which they had to turn into a vehicle for Batch Cumber, or whatever his name is, and Benedict Cumberbatch, and so you can get a much better sense of all of the people involved in a situation like that, where they're working together as an ensemble, then I think you get out of, and I always beat on Braveheart because it's probably the most historically inaccurate film that I've ever seen. But any of these type of films, whether it's The Revolution with Al Pacino, even outside of comedy, a film that does this, I think, very, very well was The Chariots of Fire from 1981. And this is something I think Hollywood can learn from some of the directors overseas, which is that you can have a very entertaining film and this actually did pretty well financially, considering A, its budget, and B, its distribution was through a second. And it's really gained cult status, especially on video. You can have a successful film without having to spotlight, hey, this is Tom Cruise as a Nazi officer. Hey, this is, and I think I wish there were more films like this, and obviously less Imitation Games and a lot less Bravehearts. Well, that's the end of my notes. So, does anybody else have anything before we go into closing remarks? This will be a nice tight 1 hour episode if we do that. Once I edit it out and everyone has their closing remarks. All right. Well, go ahead, Sila. All right. Well, Sila.
No, I was just going to comment. I have nothing additional to add.
All right. Well, hi. Any final remarks on Death of Stalin? Also, anything you want to plug, and where people can find you on the internet?
Thank you, Eric. Again, I'm glad that Matt picked it, and I'm glad that you said yes to it. It's a very cool film. I didn't know it had achieved cult status, but I'm very happy to hear it because it deserves it, and it's not the kind of movie that one makes to necessarily attract a huge audience, but it's a really interesting and well-made film about a really important era in history, and I'm glad it exists. And I'm glad, thanks to your room, that I found out about it. In terms of plugs, I've done 4 episodes of my movie and TV deep dive podcast on The Bear, Baby Reindeer, Jim Henson Idea Man, and House of a Dragon. So please feel encouraged to look for that wherever podcasts are available. You can just Google for movie and TV deep dive. And also, I'm a ghostwriter. So I'm a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author whose books have sold over 1 million copies. And I love helping other people create books. If you might be interested in my services, please visit my website at bookproposal.net. That's bookproposal, one word, .net. And Eric and Sila, it's great to see you both again.
Yeah, good to see you. Hi. Hi has been kind of on hiatus from this room because he was focusing on his deep dive podcast, and it's good to have you back. Good to getting the old band back together, so to speak. Sila Blume, any final thoughts, and where people can find you on the internet, and if you've got any upcoming projects you want to plug.
Again, I am glad to have seen the movie. I would like to convincingly say that I need to watch it again, but I feel the same about almost every single movie we discuss, so I am assuming I will not get around to watch it again. But the intention is there because I think it's a very interesting movie, and the more I would watch it, I would probably even be inspired to look into some of this historical aspects, a little bit of the dynamic, one-to-one, what happened there, to just to expand on the idea of the movie. Tomorrow would be the celebration, or it is the celebration of the premiere of Siegfried. That is the second day in the ring cycle of the Nibelungen by Richard Wagner. So I will be playing that tomorrow. It's, I think, 4.5 hours. I always get confused. The movies that are 4 or 5 hours or 3.5, but it's a long one. So I'll be doing that tomorrow. And other than that, thank you very much for doing this film and these rooms and these discussions to just dive deeper into the wonderful world of the cinema.
And the name of your website is?
Very simple. It is my life, namely silablume.life.
silablume.life. Gotcha. And I'm going to just kind of end with the fact that I was kind of raised with half of my family either former or active Trotskyites. And so from childhood, I was raised with these stories from my uncle Trotsky. And yes, his name was Trotsky, no relation, just a coincidence there. But if a story like this can pass muster with that, I don't understand why a bunch of historians are saying that this is going to somehow damage people by telling them historical inaccuracy. That is to say, they got enough right that even my Uncle Trot would have said, hey, yeah, that's pretty damn funny. And my Uncle Trot was the ultimate supporter of Leon Trotsky, who spent 20 years of his life running from Joseph Stalin and ended up being assassinated by one of Stalin's goons in Mexico. So if it was good enough for my family, God damn it, it's good enough for yours. I highly recommend this film. I do have a couple of things to plug. Next week, we're doing the Amazon series, The Decameron, of course, based on Boccaccio's 14th century stories. However, it's done in a very updated way with music from the 1980s from bands like New Order and Depeche Mode. And I've always said it's Love Island set during the Great Plague. It's a wonderful piece of trash, or it's a trashy piece of wonder. You decide. love it or hate it, come on in. It's a very, very, very controversial adaptation, and I think we're going to have a great and maybe rowdy discussion about it, because there is a lot of love for it, but there's also a lot of hate, and all are welcome to express their opinions on it. So that's next week here, and again, that's over on Amazon is where you can catch that. I also kind of want to plug an appearance I'm doing Sunday in the New Jazz Listener Room. I'm going to be, they have a weekly guest who picks three pieces of jazz music that you'd want to introduce somebody who perhaps wasn't either a lover of or familiar with jazz music. I'm doing a one based on three jazz classics that were from films that I loved. I'm not going to spoil what films they were, but the three artists that I have chosen were Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, and Steely Dan. So that's Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is a membership room, so if you're not a member and do want to go see it, you will have to sign up ahead of time. But they have a very quick approval system. So anybody who if you like jazz music, or if you don't know a lot about jazz music and want to learn more, there is 90 minutes of your life could be a lot worse spent than there. It's actually one of my favorite rooms on Clubhouse. So, and I'll be a guest speaker there. So there's my plug. And if you want to get a hold of me online, the easiest place is on my Twitter, where I'm at ETROMMATER. Again, I'm Eric Trommater. Thank you to Hi Bender, Sila, Blume, and Matt, whose name I can't pronounce, and so I'm going to just cut his name in the editing. And of course, Yassi wasn't able to be here, but thank you all, as always, to Yassi Soufi, who is basically my co-producer on these programs. I appreciate every one of you. Thank you for Saran and Donia for being in the audience. And unless anybody's got anything else, I'm going to end this room in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good night, everybody. Have a great one.